How are you tonight? Thank you for coming, and greetings to those at home who are watching on television. I'm Elizabeth Radow, Chair of the Larchmont Mamaroneck League of Women Voters Environmental Committee. Our topic this evening, protecting the value of your home and our Long Island Sound watershed communities, a regional perspective on water quality management and flood control. This evening is dedicated to our treasured Long Island Sound, which sits across the street, and the future well-being of our community at large. Is this mic okay? Yeah. Okay, good. The Sound spans 110 miles from Connecticut to Westchester on the North Shore and across Long Island Sound on the South Shore, with as much as 21 miles in between. More than 8 million people live in the Long Island Sound watershed, with millions more recreating annually in and around it, making it home sweet home to many, and a multi-billion-dollar at-risk asset. In 1994, the seminal Long Island Sound study identified nitrogen and other contaminants as the root causes of pollution threatening marine life in the Sound through so-called point source pollution coming from an identifiable source such as wastewater treatment plant, and so-called non-point source coming from non-specific locations such as stormwater runoff. The study adopted the watershed planning approach to reduce the non-point source stormwater pollution, since this approach follows water, sediment, and dissolved material it contains along its natural course. The portion of the Long Island Sound watershed in Westchester addressed tonight consists of White Plains, Portchester, Rye, Harrison, Rye Brook, Scarsdale, New Rochelle, Eastchester, Mount Vernon, Pelham, Pelham Manor, Larchmont, Mamaroneck Town and Village, and Rye Neck. Among our audience tonight are members of government in the community who work tirelessly to produce the Long Island Sound study, the follow-up county plans, and responsive intermunicipal practices which continue to this day and have taken on an expanded role in response to area flooding. We owe these people a debt of thanks. I would also like to acknowledge the work of our members of county and state government, some of whom could not attend tonight because they are in session in Albany. Tonight we will continue the process with discussion of who is responsible for wastewater and stormwater that flows and more often now floods through our watershed, and how to preserve the value of our homes and restore our community. Before you leave tonight, please introduce yourself to the people sitting all around you and mention where you live. Tonight is both a forum for providing you with information and a community gathering intended to invite your questions, ideas, and action in restoring and redirecting the water flow for our collective benefit. To that end, we should know one another. Please use the paper, I think that's been passed around, to submit a question for our panelists and to exchange email addresses with others here. In my legal practice, which has spanned nearly 25 years, I represent property owners, usually commercial property owners, who want to buy and develop, fix, finance, or sell a piece of property. And in a field so heavily influenced by the condition of the financial markets and the natural environment, I am called upon daily to assess and overcome the complexities presented by limited funding and environmental degradation, the challenges presented by tonight's topic. I offer that so that you will have a context for my remarks tonight. In addition, in 1987, I purchased a weekend home in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, with a yard located at or probably below sea level, surrounded by spanning salt marshes that merged across the road into the Long Island Sound. And for the 18 years that I lived there, I followed the tides from my backyard and came to know the Sound as a magnificent living being, deserving of my protection because of my great affection for it. After moving to the town of Mamaroneck in 2000, I joined the Village of Mamaroneck Mayor's Advisory Committee on Water Quality, whose goal was improving water quality in the Long Island Sound. And last June, my tenure as the committee chair culminated in passage of a water quality or no illegal hookup law proposed by me, drafted by the village, commented on by the village trustees, the Water Quality Committee, and other committees, and expanded upon by Robert Funicello from the county, an example of community effort. Similar to the towns of Mamaroneck's law, the village's local law 9 requires a licensed plumber to certify to a purchaser's title company before transfer of title that the stormwater and wastewater coming from a property are independently channeled into the right systems. The intended effect is to reduce the burden of unwelcome stormwater in our wastewater treatment plant and prevent backflows of unsanitary water in people's basements. I mention this law to demonstrate that our legal system enables citizens like me and like you to participate in our governance. Given the extreme rain events over the past few years and the flooding which resulted, our conversation on aging infrastructure and water management has by necessity converted into a call for deliberative but prompt action. Tonight I will set the stage for our next speakers through a presentation entitled Water Knows No Boundaries in a State with Home Rule, Understanding Water Pollution and Flood Control from a Watershed Community Perspective. Thomas Lauro, Commissioner of Westchester County Department of Environmental Facilities, will provide an overview of the wastewater treatment system in Westchester County. And following Tom, Leonard Meyerson, Deputy Commissioner of Westchester County Department of Health, Division of Environmental Health, will provide an overview of the stormwater system in Westchester County. Next, Richard Franzetti, Senior Project Engineer with Malcolm Perney, Inc., will discuss the role of a regional stormwater management district to address water quality and flood issues. And then Lenny Meyerson will return with a discussion of above-ground scenic green solutions to watershed management. Our evening will conclude with approaches for homeowners to consider. And my guess is that we'll take probably pretty close to the 2 hours, but for those wishing to remain, we have a question and answer period, and Jim Scholl from Malcolm Perney is here, and he has actually been involved in the formation of stormwater districts, and so he's an excellent person to ask questions about the practical aspects of the process. Now, as mentioned before, every person can participate and make a difference. Since upgrading our water quality and downsizing the flow is a multi-step process, audience members and those watching at home are encouraged to continue the dialogue after tonight with one another, including someone on your municipal board. By expressing your support and concerns and maintaining an open and ongoing communication throughout, our elected officials can better advance the process. If there is the will on the part of the community at large to take a regional approach, the logistics and details will follow. If audience members have explored other viable approaches, please make that known as well. The League's Environmental Committee will continue to hold open forums as the process evolves. So, water knows no boundaries. Are there any Aretha Franklin fans here tonight? Okay. Well, I'm not ready for my singing debut, but if this water could speak, what it would say is, what you want, baby, I got it, and what you need, you know I got it. Can you help me? All I'm asking is for a little respect. Now, considering that water is essential to human life, how we handle our water directly affects our own health. While tonight's discussion does not involve drinking water per se, it does involve the water we swim in and the water that feeds the marine life we consume. I'm sorry, the marine life that feeds, the water that feeds the marine life we consume. For those here with home vegetable and herb gardens, the quality of stormwater that sustains our local harvests translates into the quality of the food that we eat and feed our families. We are what we eat. If we respect ourselves and one another, we should likewise respect the quality of the water that nourishes us. Now, imagine this vase represents our watershed and observe what happens. Imagine the blue coloring represents heavy rain. The green coloring represents the stress on our system from removing and replacing trees and grass which filter, absorb, and cool water with impervious surfaces which heat, retain contaminants, and convey the resulting water mix downstream. Imagine the yellow coloring represents contaminated stormwater resulting from our failure to enforce our legal hookup laws, our pooper scoop laws, and otherwise fail to pass laws limiting the type and quantity of chemicals that property owners can use, which inevitably end up compromising our marine life, particularly nitrogen-rich fertilizer. Imagine the red coloring represents stormwater entering the wastewater system through cracked pipes and otherwise penetrable places. Now imagine that water flowing into your basement, through our rivers and streams, and ultimately into the Long Island Sound. We all share an important thread, our home. Our home represents our safe haven. Our home typically represents our most valuable asset, one we endeavor to maintain, enhance, and protect at all costs. When the nor'easter released a record rainfall last April 15th requiring evacuation for those most affected and otherwise flooding homes with contaminated water, we were robbed of our security both literally and figuratively. Banks and insurance companies began imposing stricter scrutiny when appraising and assessing the insurability of the property being purchased or financed, and not just coincidentally because the subprime market was collapsing, but because the asset itself, our home, our community, presented a potentially greater risk. With the value of our homes in play, it is incumbent upon us to switch gears from a reactive mode to a preventative mode, to plan for the future by retrofitting our homes, re-emphasizing the role of our gardens, and adjusting our building codes and other relevant laws to accommodate extreme weather conditions and rising sea levels. In addition to the effect on our homes, with each unchecked storm, our rivers and streams further erode, and our wastewater and stormwater systems further strain and crack from age and pressure. And with that, our community experiences the cumulative effects of loss. Regional restoration is needed to accomplish effective improvement. We have to take stock of the conditions affecting our homes and our community first, and then take action. That is what tonight is all about. By the time you leave here tonight, you will have been presented with a fundamental overview of our wastewater treatment and stormwater systems, the challenges presented by water pollution and flooding, and one approach, namely a regional approach, with which to meet these challenges. Now, to get a perspective on the regional approach, it may help to mentally move your home around the watershed from time to time as the evening progresses. Maybe try out a place that you wanted to live and never have, White Plains, Scarsdale, Rye, and so forth. Imagine how the practices you keep in your home affect the quality, quantity, and flow of water your next-door neighbor experiences, and how the practices your municipality permits impact upon neighboring municipalities. Keep in mind, water knows no boundaries in a state with home rule. In a nutshell, home rule represents New York State's delegation of decision-making on land use matters to individual municipalities. Each municipality, through its zoning code and planning board, makes decisions affecting land use within its geographic boundary. From White Plains to the shore towns and through all points in between, go with the flow characterizes the route taken where water is concerned. It entirely disregards the presence of municipal boundaries. What goes down one person's drain in Scarsdale or New Rochelle may reappear in a Larchmont basement before reaching the Sound. Ask yourself, whose water is that in your basement, and how did it get there? It took years, decades really, to get where we are today, one development, one storm at a time, and no single action or easy fix exists. Accepting that difficult fact will help facilitate the meaningful restoration we all seek. For example, while the Army Corps of Engineers may well produce a report advocating the benefits of dredging our rivers to mitigate flooding, we should honor that recommendation in its relevant context, yet not lose sight that the bigger picture regarding water quality and flood control extends well beyond our overflowing rivers to perspectives, practices, and priorities that likewise require examination. Federal and state environmental law, as well as local law, create a framework for the real estate development process. After decades of land use decisions, our watershed, on the one hand, reflects the individual character determined by each municipality, and on the other hand, reflects the cumulative consequences of home rule decisions. The current preference to remain in one's home and expand its footprint to accommodate growing families with bigger kitchens, family rooms, and added bedrooms is entirely understandable. Building high-rise apartments in suburban city centers near public transport to accommodate both a commuter population seeking housing options outside of Manhattan and the shift in demographics to an older adult population wishing to move from their larger local homes also makes sense. Yet real estate development necessarily requires an increasing respect for the omnipresence of wastewater and stormwater in our midst, and these competing interests require reconciliation. In its recently released 2025 report, Westchester County acknowledges the well-established tradition of home rule, enabling municipalities to direct control over land use, and advocates a new paradigm, both respectful of home rule, yet able to handle infrastructure decisions from a regional perspective. Much as our newly seated governor has enlisted legislators to reach across the political aisle to produce a timely, balanced budget, so are we being asked to reach across the municipal border to preserve the value of what we hold dear. According to the county's 2025 report, future development in our county will consist of redevelopment and new construction in the county's downtowns with access to rail station. Development will also include waterfront parcels on both the Hudson River and the Long Island Sound, which are expected to complete a transition from industrial to residential, commercial, and recreational uses in the next decade. Since water knows no municipal boundaries, paying attention to new development from a regional perspective is critical because real estate developers reflect the primary gatekeepers to the future landscape and skyline of our county. And from a stormwater perspective, Mamaroneck cares that a new mixed-use project in White Plains incorporates porous asphalt and maximizes the use of green space such as green roofs and rain gardens. The more water that actually gets filtered by the greenery and absorbed into the ground there translates into less stormwater runoff of better quality here. Now, while developers represent what future development looks like on a grand scale, opportunities exist for each of us as property owners to restore in our own backyards and neighborhoods what decades of decisions and an aging infrastructure have taken away, something I will address further later. Home rule aside, the first step to meet the challenge is to identify and acknowledge the major contributing factors to water pollution and flooding. And they include illegal dumping without a license, aging infrastructure, and a loss of permeable surfaces. The second step would entail a due diligence review of the laws and practices enacted by each municipality throughout the watershed relating to or affecting water, which address these major contributing factors. So imagine a grid or a spreadsheet with the name of the municipality on the left side and the type of law across the top, and a code from 1 to 10, grading the comprehensiveness of the law in force for that topic. If no law exists, it would yield a 0. A comprehensive enforceable law would yield a 10. The review would include, for example, building code setback requirements, handling of illegal hookups, the disposal by restaurants of fat and grease, and standards for use of pesticides, fertilizer, and other potentially harmful products. The due diligence would result in identifying across the board the most effective laws impacting upon water quality and flood control. The City of Seattle, with its forward-thinking proposed stormwater code, can serve as an external standard for comparison. Now, while reaching consensus on the most effective laws and practices is not intended to homogenize the character of our communities or supplant home rule, it will level the playing field. And to the extent that we take a regional approach through formation of a stormwater management district, the district might either encourage or require all members to adopt certain model legal practices identified as a result of the due diligence, or otherwise prioritize capital projects for those municipalities which adopt and enforce the most effective practices, all other things being equal. The Center for Watershed Protection performed a study to determine why watershed plans fail, and found that the most protective practices don't become adopted into law. To that I would add, even when the most protective practices do become enacted into law, they often don't get enforced. If we were to form a regional stormwater district, a portion of the property owner fees collected could be designated to pay for uniform oversight and enforcement of the stormwater management laws that we take the time to enact at all levels of government. While up-county municipalities may feel less urgency to enlist in a regional approach, their wastewater and stormwater runs through the pipes, roads, rivers, streams, and sometimes basements of those downstream. And with that right comes a responsibility. Waterfront communities situated beside our vital tidal wetlands likewise bear a special responsibility to maintain high standards and regularly monitor what flows into the Sound. After all, we are a community. As for upgrading and restoring our infrastructure, each municipality will naturally have projects that it wants taken care of first. Keeping in mind the intermunicipal nature of the district, a full assessment of our regional water infrastructure is essential to any meaningful planning. Westchester County and individual municipalities have been assembling information through GIS, or Geographic Imaging Systems mapping. The devil is in the details. So let's inventory the water system down to the last lateral pipe and manhole cover. It's what I analogize to a full MRI or body scan of the patient. And the patient here happens to be our wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, which spans the entire watershed. Through comprehensive GIS mapping, we can facilitate a full inventory of each municipality's drainage facilities or assets, their condition, and their useful life. We can also determine what's missing and what requires installation. GIS can also identify and locate drainage easements and methods of stormwater conveyance from one end of the watershed to the other. Before embarking on any capital projects, it likewise makes sense to evaluate the watershed's overall structural integrity and vulnerabilities. And this would involve engineering studies along the lines of that commissioned by the village of Larchmont to remediate the Pine Brook region flooding involving New Rochelle and Larchmont. The goal, an objective risk assessment to identify the weakest points in our watershed system, those most vulnerable to the greatest economic fallout from a storm. And based upon this analysis, a prioritized list of capital projects could be developed. In addition to below-ground upgrades and retrofits, these engineering analyses would optimally recommend strategic locations above ground, where all property owners can add or enhance so-called green infrastructure, such as wetlands, rain gardens, green roofs, porous asphalt, and other solutions to improve water quality and reduce flooding. And the results of this GIS mapping effort and regional engineering analysis would serve to update each municipality's comprehensive plan, benefit a regional stormwater management district, and help the county to facilitate coordinated practices. The Army Corps of Engineers, as mentioned earlier, has undertaken its own analysis of waterways flooded during the nor'easter, and the results could be integrated into the data compiled for use by the district. The long-term financial benefits and viability of Westchester County necessarily includes attracting real estate developers, new home buyers, and new businesses. A restored and functional water infrastructure is critical to that end. Optimizing funding sources for such restoration will obviously assist in achieving that goal, particularly in our current challenging economic climate. A regional approach presents the best potential for leveraging funds not available to individual municipalities. For example, in addition to its emergency disaster assistance, FEMA provides a range of flood mitigation grants to municipalities and individuals, provided the municipality has a FEMA-approved mitigation plan, one which embodies the types of risk assessments and prioritizing cost-benefit strategies presented here tonight. And FEMA recognizes multi-jurisdictional mitigation planning as a plus. In addition, FEMA's voluntary community rating system rewards municipal practices that exceed minimal flood prevention standards by reducing flood insurance premiums for policyholders such as you and me. So the approved mitigation plan can also potentially provide direct cost savings to the property owner. Also, for 2007-2008, New York's Department of State Shared Municipal Services Incentive Program will provide funding for shared services and other cooperative agreements. Prior funding has included GIS, and for 2008-2009, funding is intended to include water authorities and sewer authorities. Thus, this SMSI program might very well fund the shared GIS mapping and engineering analyses I mentioned earlier. Locally, Westchester County's Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, established after the nor'easter by County Executive Spano, received County Board of Legislators approval to include in the 2008 budget the first $10 million out of the 5-year $50 million fund total for qualifying municipalities. The county's funding criteria, among other things, requires the municipal applicant to pass a resolution committing it to work cooperatively with other municipalities and the county on watershed planning efforts, our topic of the evening. In addition to more available funding sources, the economies of scale achieved from a regional approach should likewise result in lower associated property owner payments to fund capital improvements than would the individual municipal approach. So let us begin. Our first speaker is Thomas Lauro, Commissioner of the Westchester County Department of Environmental Facilities. Tom has been a resident of Tarrytown since 1979. He earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in environmental engineering from Manhattan College. After working with Malcolm Perney for 7 years, Tom moved to the County of Westchester in 1980, where he has succeeded through the ranks from Assistant Director of Wastewater Treatment to his current post as Commissioner. This evening, Tom will provide an overview of Westchester County's wastewater treatment system and an understanding of who, as among the county, the municipality, and the property owner, is legally responsible for what. Tom will address current water quality and capacity challenges relating to inflow, infiltration, and flooding, compliance with federal and state law, including the DEC consent order, And Tom will also address short-term and long-term plans for the future. Please welcome Tom Laura.
Thank you, Beth. It's good to be here tonight. I can see by everyone being here, you're the people, by your presence here tonight, that are really interested in water quality in Long Island Sound and in this watershed. So why don't we get started? I'll give you a little bit of the history of the, or what the Department of Environmental Facilities is composed of. I can have the first slide. The Department of Environmental Facilities is the operating department for the Westchester County. And you can see it's broken up into several different divisions. We have our wastewater, and we'll get into that a lot tonight. Water, we distribute water to communities, the Grasslands Reservation, also White Plains, Scarsdale, Yonkers, and Mount Vernon. Solid waste, you may have seen me give a presentation on our recycling initiatives, but we do handle municipal solid waste and recycling for the county. And the wastewater division, the division we're going to talk about tonight, we have 7 wastewater treatment plants in the county, 43 pumping stations all over the county, 2 overflow retention facilities. These are located, one in Larchmont and one in Rochelle. And when we have a significant rain, those will activate. Typically, we get them to activate 2 or 3 times a year. And because of the design of the sewers, if they can't take all the water, these retention basins will fill up. If the total capacity of the retention basin is totally full, then the water will be chlorinated, disinfected, and then it will be pumped out into Long Island Sound. 200 miles of sewer, of that 151 miles are gravity sewer and 49 miles of force main. This is what the county owns and operates, and we'll get into a little bit of who else owns the rest of the sewers. These are the county's 13 sewer districts. They're all numbered. If I can, this is Portchester, the Rye, or what we call Blind Brook, the Mamaroneck district in here, and then the New Rochelle district. The rest of these districts, all up in here, that all goes to the Yonkers Joint Wastewater Treatment Plant. There are 7 sewer districts that go to that plant. And we have Ossining, and we have Peekskill up at the top. The rest of this area up here in white does not belong to a sewer district. They either have small package plants or small treatment plants or septic systems. You will be interested to note that even though we have 13 sewer districts, there are over 7,300 septic systems within those sewer districts. Next. So we're going to concentrate on the sound side treatment plants. This is our Portchester treatment plant. See I-95 over here, Portchester DPW yard. If I can have the next slide is some of the details of the plant. The design flow, you can see is 6 million gallons. Last year we treated 4.7 on average. And the capacity, when it rains, it does go up to 13.4 million gallons. So you can see that there's a tripling of the flow when it rains. In this particular sewer district, we do not own any sewers. All the sewers are local sewers that belong to the Village of Portchester. And they own their pumping stations as well. You can see the population, and keep an eye on these numbers. They will become significant, but back in 1989, actually the county took over this treatment plant, I believe, in around 1977, and it was upgraded to secondary treatment in 1989, and that was the cost to do that, and they had all the solids handling facilities. Next. Our next is our Blind Brook treatment plant, and you can see the plant in here. It's surrounded by Disbro Park and Rye. And one of the features you should be aware of is the lack of space inside each one of these sites. Those sites are pretty much built out. There's not a lot of room for expansion or to do additional work, so it becomes very difficult. If I could have the next one. Just to give you an idea of the relative size. Population's about the same as Portchester. The flows, the design flow and the average flow are about the same. Again, the hydraulic capacity is 15 million gallons. So you can see this one even goes up further. It's like 5 or 6 times the flow, because it does go up to the maximum when it rains. And again, secondary treatment added in 1985, $13 million. Mamaroneck, and everybody knows I don't know if we can see ourselves on the map here, but we're not far from the Mamaroneck treatment plant, Harbor Island Park, all the way around it. Again, you can see that this is our footprint, except a little bit of grass out here and a parking lot. That's about the only spare space that we have. Mamaroneck plant's one of our larger plants on the sound side, this one in New Rochelle. You can see that the design flow is over 20, and last year the flow was 15.1 million gallons. A little later in the presentation, I'll show you the flows as they existed during the nor'easter, and you'll note that this is the hydraulic capacity. When we see what happened during the nor'easter, we exceeded our hydraulic capacity and the amount of water and sewage that we put through the plant. 39 miles of trunk sewer, and we have 8 pumping stations, 90,000 people that are tributary to this. And if you look at it, and Beth alluded to it, the watershed approach, treatment plants usually are designed, the regional ones, by a watershed approach. You will note that our sewer districts cross municipal boundaries. So this receives flow from White Plains, Scarsdale, and different communities to get to Mamaroneck. And again, in 1989, $100 million to upgrade this plant, just from primary treatment to secondary treatment. Last is our New Rochelle plant. This one probably has the most property of any of our, this is Five Island Park out here, Echo Bay in here, and this is the high school. Yeah, and Salesian, that's correct. And this plant is probably one of our older plants on the sound side. The next slide. Something significant about the New Rochelle plant is, as you can see, this is the design flow, and last year the flow exceeded the design flow. So there is an order on consent by the state, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and we have a temporary or a interim limit of 19.2. Tributary population is a little bit less than Mamaroneck, and we have a lot of pumping stations in there. Next. So here are a little bit closer view of the Soundside districts. The red lines that you see here, those are our trunk sewers that the county owns. So all the connecting sewers in all of these locations in here, those belong to the towns and villages. They're responsible for their maintenance and upkeep. If there are blockages, they take care of them. The county has what we call a CMOM program. It's an acronym for Capacity Management, Operation, and Maintenance. We have a program where over 10 years we will go through all of our trunk sewer lines, TV them, take a look at them. If they need repairs, there'll be repairs. And it's an ongoing process of maintenance. So the Soundside sewers, we have 66 miles, but the 4 Soundside sewer districts in total have a total of 518 miles. So you can see the county is kind of a small fraction of the sewers that are in those districts. So just it's kind of a simple picture, I know, but just wanted to break down. On the sound side, you have 2 pipes in the ground. You have a sanitary sewer and you have a storm sewer. With the exception of a 4 square mile area in southwest Yonkers, all of these sewers in Westchester County are separate sewers. There's 2 pipes. In that combined sewer area in Yonkers, there is 1 pipe for both stormwater and sanitary. But in this case, all of your sanitary waste from your toilets, tubs, showers would go in here. But all of your foundation drains, roof leaders and gutters, and sump pumps should get into the storm sewer along with the catch basins. And there shouldn't be any cross connections. And you can see here, it should never be connected to the sanitary sewer. When I first came to Tarrytown in 1979, we had some water problems in the basement, so I wanted to put in a sump pump. And my father was helping me at that time. He's a plumber from Brooklyn. And he said, "Oh yeah, we'll fix this right up. We'll just pipe this right into the sanitary sewer." I said, "No, you can't do that here." But see, down in New York City, they have combined sewers, so that was perfectly legal to do it that way, not here. So next, just what are illegal connections? Non-sanitary connections to the sanitary sewer system, again, sump pumps, foundation drains, and roof leaders. I know this is a little bit of a busy slide, but if you look at some of these dates, the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th of April, you can see how high the flow got in Mamaroneck. It's got a hydraulic capacity of 90. It actually went up to 108. The average for that day was 49 because of when the storm hit, but the average for the next day was 90 million gallons. So we were at peak capacity and running that way for quite a bit of time. And you can see some of the other ones, Blind Brook going up to its peak capacity, New Rochelle above its hydraulic capacity, even on the average days, treating all of that water. The same with Portchester. I estimate that probably on that day we treated an extra 300 million gallons that just wasn't sanitary sewage, that was just stormwater. If I can have the next slide. This slide just graphically depicts where the design flows were for the Mamaroneck treatment plant and what the flows, the average flow for the day was. This is for the same period in 07, that was the average, and then in 06 it's down here, 2000 for the whole year, and this is the permit limit. So we're well above that and maintaining treatment at the same time. One of the problems when you're dealing with stormwater, and it's our job to get the inflow and infiltration out of the sewers. However, if we do that and we're very successful at that, that's just more stormwater that everybody has to deal with. So currently in our treatment plants, we estimate that the inflow and infiltration, this is either groundwater or illegal connections from sump pumps and leaders and gutters, and then the groundwater be coming up through cracks and displaced joints, is probably 50% of the flow to our plants. If you look at the flows that we have and the people that we serve and how much typically water people use, 50% is from I&I. 99% of the I&I is in the collector sewers. The county has looked at its own sewers. There are some leakage, but most of it is in municipally owned sewers, and I would say a significant portion is private I&I. And these are because the municipal sewers, especially in the sewer districts on the sound side, have had work done to them. They've had some I&I removed. There's yet more to be done. But the private I&I, which is the connection from the house to the street, they probably haven't been looked at in quite a long time. And Beth had indicated something about legislation or local laws that would require people to certify when a house changes hands, the property changes hands, to certify either by an inspector or a professional engineer to go in and TV those laterals and to make sure that they're in good condition, line them if they're not, to remove a lot of that I&I. Did we skip over one? Or am I out of order? Okay, that's good. So what is an acceptable amount of flow, or how do we tell how much we're supposed to have? And for instance, we took New Rochelle and we took the average for the year, 14,900,000 gallons a day, and we divided it by the population from the latest census in 2000. And we came up with 228 gallons per capita per day, just to take a rough estimate. Engineering design estimates, the numbers, even though it says 100 to 150, design is usually 100. The county sewer use ordinance requires 150 gallons per capita per day, and that's developed using 100 gallons per day per capita for sewage, and allowing some I&I, no sewer is perfect, there's some leakage allowed, of 50 gallons per capita per day. So you can see here by this example, it exceeds the sewer use ordinance. Next. Okay. So where does this come from? From the two sectors, either the public, and you can see displaced joints, cracks, where the laterals come in, that joint there is a lot of times leaks, and then the private due to leaky house connections and illegal connections from sump pumps and leaders and gutters. Next. So, to address this problem and to look at future flows and loads, because a lot of the things that we're going to do going forward, and I will address in a few minutes, really are impacted by this I&I. And having to design treatment plants to treat this flow, which is really fairly clean water, it's better to get it out and design something a little bit more economically viable than to have to treat all of this I&I. So we've proposed a flow monitoring program. We've already, it's not really I&Is, but permits with local communities to install flow monitors. You can see here someone who is tethered down the sewer, ready to set up a flow monitoring and to actually see where the flow is coming from and try and identify the problems. And are they close to 150 gallons per capita per day? Some municipalities do a very good job of investigating and repairing their sewers. This is kind of a simplistic slide about how we would put different flow meters in to add them up and come up with the different municipalities, either by addition or subtraction, to determine where the flows are coming from and which ones might be excessive and might need further work. Next. So some of the capital programs that we have going on in the plants on the sound side, we have been working with the New York Power Authority to do energy evaluations for all the plants. We have done individual programs with them, but this will be full plant evaluations to make sure that we're using Energy Star pieces of equipment, efficient lighting, heating, things of that nature. A lot of our pump motors are already high efficiency motors, and we use what we call variable frequency drives to match the loads in the plant to our pumping and our other equipment. Upcoming, we're going to be doing some pumping station upgrades at our Woodbine and Magnolia pumping stations. And in Mamaroneck, we have our East Basin pumping station, which will be upgraded. We're going to be doing further upgrades in Brook. That's under design right now. PM3 refers to performance maintenance. This is the third stage of it and the last stage of the performance maintenance to improve the different pieces of equipment in the plant. You see it was upgraded in 1985. The equipment is over 20 years old and it needs replacement or upgrading or rehabilitation. The same thing with Portchester, which is now underway. Mamaroneck preliminary treatment upgrade is in design, so that will be coming up. And we have some, the consent order that I alluded to before, because the flow is above the permitted limit, we will be seeking a new permit for about 20 million gallons a day. And there are other upgrades to bring it up to full secondary treatment, and that is an estimate of the cost. So you can see it's not a cheap process. Just to give you a sense of infrastructure needs, New York State DEC wastewater infrastructure had $36.2 billion over the next 20 years. I believe that that's probably a low number. just looking at some of the regulations and the requirements, not only for nutrient removal, but for stormwater. Those infrastructure needs are probably going to exceed $36 billion in 20 years. And then the EPA has come up with their gap analysis, where they feel for the country it'll be $309 billion over 20 years. Staggering numbers. And ratepayers or taxpayers are, right now there are no grant programs. A lot of the treatment plant upgrades that you saw when I first showed those slides, anywhere from $18 million to $100 million, were done with grant funding from the EPA and from New York State to the tune of about 87.5%. Today, there are no grant programs, and a lot of this is falling on the shoulders of the local taxpayers. The 4 Long Island Soundside plants were under a consent order to remove nitrogen as being the nutrient of concern for Long Island Sound. There is an engineering plan that has been approved by the state of New York for these upgrades to all 4 of these plants. And as I had mentioned before, there's not a lot of land at these plants. So these upgrades, which are significant upgrades in the hundreds of millions of dollars, need to reduce the nitrogen from 4,552 pounds per day down to 1,768. It's not a lot of pounds per day, but the cost will be pretty staggering. We're currently working with the state DEC and other parties to try and figure out the best and most cost-effective way to deal with this. But right now, the clock is ticking, and these upgrades have to be in place by 2014. And I guess we're doing questions at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Leonard Meyerson, Deputy Commissioner of Westchester County Department of Health, Division of Environmental Health. Lenny has been a resident of New Rochelle since 1977. He has a Bachelor of Science from CCNY, Master of Science from Lehman College, and a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Manhattan College. Lenny is certified as a professional engineer in New York. After teaching in New York City for 9 years, Lenny changed careers and worked for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation for 21 years, most recently managing its DEC Region 3 Division of Water program as the regional water engineer. In July 2007, Lenny joined the Westchester County Department of Health as Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Health. In Lenny's first presentation this evening, he will provide an overview of Westchester County's stormwater system and an understanding of who, as among the county, the municipality, and the property owner, is responsible for what. Lenny will also address current health and other challenges relating to water quality and flood compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act and related state law. Please welcome Lenny Meyerson.
I want to thank all of you for coming tonight on a weeknight to spend some time to learn about stormwater and sanitary water and water pollution and flooding issues. It's a valuable thing that citizens take the time to have the interest. Ultimately, dealing with the environment and being successful in doing so is a political process, and it requires citizens to care enough about it to make it happen. So I appreciate you coming here. For starters, I'd like to give a little overview about environmental law and regulation. Before 1972, there were some federal statutes for water quality and pollution control, but they were very weak. And what was happening in the 70s, in the 60s going into the 70s, there was an enormous amount of damage being done to the environment. Most of it had to do with sewage that wasn't being treated. So Congress took it upon themselves at the same time that they were looking at issues like Superfund and the Clean Air Act. The Clean Water Act was promulgated. The original idea was, let's control pollutants in all the water that enters our waterways from all sources. They looked at sanitary wastewater, what comes out of our bathrooms and the drains in our houses, and they also looked at stormwater. Stormwater is different in that a lot of it is sheet flow. It just goes over the land and a sheet and goes into water bodies. And some of it goes through pipes, through storm sewers and outlets that way. But they came to the conclusion that the amount of stormwater outlets and to try and figure out how to control all the sheet flow was just too much. It was too onerous. So they just focused on sanitary wastewater, on sewage at that time. So the original Clean Water Act said stormwater is exempt. They never even considered looking at it. And it focused entirely on sanitary wastewater. And you see in 1977, the original Clean Water Act received amendments to make it even stronger. And the goal was to bring all sanitary wastewater throughout the country up to what they call secondary treatment standards, which is the minimum that you need to not pollute water bodies. They developed individual permits. In the federal level, it was called NPDES permits, and it was delegated to many states, including New York State. In New York State, it's known as SPEDIES permits. These are individual permits that prescribe when you design a wastewater treatment plant, what level of treatment is needed to protect the water body that it's being discharged to. What happened then is over the period of time, the 70s going into the 80s, throughout the country, wastewater treatment plants were brought up to that level of secondary treatment. And it was quite successful. Going into the later 80s, there was something upwards of 90% compliance with the law. And a lot of the water bodies that were very badly degraded were coming back, they were getting restored. There were front page articles about water bodies like the Hudson, where you had aquatic species returning. You had definite appearance of improved water quality. And the program was largely successful. But the issue was, what about stormwater? Next slide. Well, it was an onerous problem, and the federal government was not moving forward to do anything about it. But NRDC took action against the federal government and sued. They pulled together a lot of data to show that the stormwater was a major source of pollutants entering our water bodies. The lawsuit was successful, and the federal government had to amend the Clean Water Act. In 1987, the amendment to the Clean Water Act was passed, and the way that's dealt with, unlike the individual SPEDIES permits that prescribes exactly what each treatment plant must do to treat the wastewater, a new concept was derived, and that was the general stormwater SPEDIES permit. That is where you have a boilerplate that applies to all those in a certain category of stormwater. Next slide. Over here, I have listed 3 major types of stormwater, general stormwater SPEDIES permits. One is for certain types of industrial activity. A typical example of that would be an automobile dismantling or a junkyard. Those were some sources you could imagine when automobiles are being scrapped, and there's gasoline and there's antifreeze and grease and all kinds of fluids and battery acid. And if you have ever been to one of those yards, you know they really can be pretty gross. Well, the concept was to keep the pollutants out, separated from the stormwater. you had to house or otherwise prevent the fluids from intermingling with the stormwater. This is the way that those permits are designed. There are several other industries that fit into that category. Another type, and I think in a modern world we've all have noticed there's a difference in the way that construction sites are designed in today's world. Any construction site, virtually any construction site you see now, has that black filter fabric around the entire perimeter. That there is now a requirement on construction sites over 1 acre or more that you prevent the stormwater runoff that might be turbid, that would carry sediment off that site into water bodies, to prevent that from happening, soil and erosion control measures. But the one I'm here to talk to you about most specifically tonight are the municipal separate storm sewer system permits. These are stormwater permits specific to whatever water gets conveyed in a stormwater pipe. When Tom spoke to you a little bit before about this, there's sanitary sewers underground and there's storm sewers underground. In the past, what went through those storm sewers had no environmental controls per se. This changes that. Now there's going to be a requirement that there be controls. Next slide, please. The way this general stormwater permits were designed, there were 2 phases. Phase 1 applied to large municipalities. That began in 1990. In New York, the only one affected by that was the city of New York. They implemented their MS4 program throughout the 90s. But there was a second part of that known as Phase 2 stormwater permits. Phase 2 took effect in 2003. In 2003, there was a 5-year period to develop the program. The program was something that took a lot of time and effort and planning to develop, and that's why there was 5 years before it became enforceable law. So what are the Phase 2 program requirements? It's to reduce the discharge of pollutants to the maximum extent practicable. Not to do anything that's going to be of exorbitant costs, but most of the measures aren't exorbitant, that there are many things that you can do to keep pollutants out of stormwater that are very reasonable. Ultimately, it's the same concept of the Clean Water Act, to protect water quality. Next. But where does the responsibility fall? Well, the way that Phase 2 requirements are for small communities, it falls on the towns and the villages, on the local governments, and not just here in Westchester, but all across our nation. The reason why that 5-year period was put in is because it was recognized that local municipal governments are not geared up for this. It's going to require that they have new programs, they have to amend local laws, they have to change the way they plan to administer the public works and the highway departments. There's many factors and many changes. There's GIS and mapping requirements. So it's really a bit of a revolution in the local government business to deal with. It was 2008 was when this became an enforceable law. It was supposed to be in January. At this point, there were public comments, and it's being extended through April, and it may be extended again because there are many individual issues that are still being ironed out. The MS4 regulations are designed to have 6 minimum control measures. The first one is public education and outreach. And that's one of the things that we're doing here tonight. to make sure citizens are informed about this act and understand why we need it and what it's about. There needs to be an opportunity for public participation and involvement, including publicizing public hearings and encouraging citizen representatives on stormwater management panels. A very significant part is the illicit discharge detection and elimination part of the measures. Basically, this means if there are pollutants leaving a storm sewer, let's say going into the Long Island Sound, and you find out about it, you have to find out if it's there first. You have to do some kind of water quality testing. And when you identify it, you have to do something about it. Construction site runoff control, up until this becomes law, the construction site stormwater controls have been completely under the jurisdiction of the state. The state DEC has been the enforcement authority for that. As soon as this law comes into effect, local governments will be responsible for whatever comes off any construction sites 1 acre or greater within their own communities. So they will have to become the authority for the construction sites and the stormwater that comes off them locally. Post-construction runoff control is very significant. One of the ways of thinking in the construction industry was that water, when you have precipitation, it creates a problem. You want to have gutters and leaders and storm sewers and get it off the property as quickly as possible and into the street and out to the water bodies. It's been very damaging. It's hurt aquatic life. It's carried pollutants. There's something called low-impact development design, which has a few advocates, and I think it's growing in understanding. And what they're talking about here is trying to keep water on site, having things like rain gardens, having things like porous surfaces instead of having everything paved over with asphalt. And finally, pollution prevention and good housekeeping, developing and implementing a program with the goal of preventing or reducing pollutant runoff from municipal operations. It includes things like having improved street sweeping programs, reducing pesticide use, only using enough salt as necessary on your streets in the winter, and doing proper catch basin cleaning. Well, being in the health department, one of the things that I'm involved in is checking water quality. As a matter of fact, starting next week, I'm going to have staff members. You know, we are responsible in the health department for making sure that the beaches are safe. So we will do fecal coliform testing on the beaches to make sure that what we measure can guarantee that the water is safe to swim in. We're the same team that does that work. Before beach season and after beach season every year now, they're going out in the boats. As a matter of fact, they'll be doing this area. Last year they did from Pelham up through southern Mamaroneck. And we actually discovered a problem at the Franklin Avenue drain along Florence, and right now we're working with local officials to try and track that down. And you might wonder, when we talk about water quality issues, the main thing that we look for are pathogens or fecal coliform. By far, that is the most common problem. And why it's a problem is the same things that Tom was talking about. The fact that you have infrastructure underground. You have a lot of sewers. Most of these sewers were not put in recently. Over the years, they crack, the seams open, they get damages. And what happens is, not only does the stormwater get into the sanitary sewer, but the sewage gets into the storm sewers. And once it's really, you have to be a detective when you discover a problem. So if one of my staff members is in the boat and he finds fecal coliform in an outlet going to the sound, he'll have to analyze where that storm sewer goes, go up the pipe, do several measurements until he finds out where that contamination ends. And working with local officials, we track that down. Other issues that come up in terms of pollutant loading from storm sewers is nutrients. Tom also talked about the BNR, the nutrient reduction. Well, a little bit about nutrient reduction. The reason why nutrients are a problem, nutrients aren't what you typically think of as a pollutant. But there are two nutrients in particular that create a lot of problems in the environment. One is nitrogen, and another one is phosphorus. And talking to biologists, I had it explained to me what they do. Why is it a problem? Well, these are basically fertilizers. If you go to the store and you put fertilizer in your garden, it'll say 5, 10, 5. Well, basically, that's talking, those refer to a certain level of potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus that's in the fertilizer. So you know when you put it on your garden, it makes the plants grow that much more. It's the same thing that happens in a water body. It's great for the plants. And the plants that are most prolific are algae. You get algae blooms. And the algae blooms, that's not what actually causes the problem. The problem occurs when the algae dies and it decomposes. And in the decomposition process, there's aerobic bacteria that help break down the plant. And when aerobic bacteria metabolize, they use up oxygen. That's why the Long Island Sound has been in bad shape. It's the algae that grows from the nutrients, and it's the amount of oxygen that you lose in the water body, creating anoxic conditions. It so happens that nitrogen is the nutrient of choice for saltwater bodies. That's what creates algae blooms in saltwater bodies. Fresh water, it's phosphorus. Those who are aware, they know about the New York City water supply. There has been a TMDL in the New York City watershed. There, it's the phosphorus that feeds the algae in fresh water that needs to be limited. Other issues are dumping in catch basins, especially like people changing antifreeze or dumping almost anything. And oil spills are always a concern. So, improving water quality can happen through the following. I talked to you about pollutant trackdown. When you have a problem in a sewer, I said you have to be a detective. Well, the technology of choice in most of these cases is televising sewers. There are probes, and a lot of municipalities have their own now, where you can send a probe up the sewer line and get a very nice televised picture. And you could find out, well, how would you tell if there was a problem? Well, if it's a dry day and you see water emerging, going into a storm sewer at a certain point that you're televising, that's a problem. There's water's coming in from someplace, and that might be contaminated water. Local code enforcement is very significant. If you find people who have a plumber who used to work in the city and illegally connected the sump or illegally connected the sanitary sewer, this happens. You need local codes so that if you have a problem, you can enforce them and get the local homeowner to do the right thing. And very significant, and one of the real problems in our society, aging infrastructure. There is a huge problem in our society, we don't pay nearly enough attention to things like storm sewers and sanitary sewers because they're out of sight, and who wants to focus and who wants to think about that? Well, the problem is that if you ignore it, guess what happens? Same sort of thing as, let's say you have an engine that's acting up and you ignore it, well, eventually it becomes a very expensive repair. That's precisely what's happening here. And we're not putting our resources into these areas that really are needed to help protect the environment and our health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lenny. In 1999, 12 municipalities in the Long Island Sound watershed formed the Long Island Sound Watershed Intermunicipal Council, or LISWIC, spearheaded by Mamaronec's own Phyllis Whitner, to address wetland and watercourse preservation and restoration. LISWIC's objectives include sharing information regarding development projects with intermunicipal impacts, developing compatible comprehensive plans, monitoring compliance and enforcement of regulations, and securing funding. These are all objectives which translate well into a regional stormwater management district, the topic of our next presentation. Our next speaker is Richard Franzetti, a senior project engineer with Malcolm Perney, Inc. Rich has received his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and his master's degree in environmental engineering from Manhattan College. Rich is a licensed professional engineer in New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico, and is a board-certified environmental engineer. Rich has over 20 years of experience in stormwater and water recourse engineering and design, including an extensive working knowledge and proficiency in stormwater management plans, flood control evaluation, sanitary and combined storm sewer collection system evaluations, and other technical hydraulic models. For the past 6 years, Rich has been a member of the Town of Carmel Environmental Conservation Board and has served as its chairman for the past 4 years. Rich will provide us with an understanding of the role of a regional stormwater management district to address water quality and flood issues, as reflected in the Malcolm Perney report on this topic, which was commissioned by LISWIC. Rich will also explore the cost, benefits, and efficiencies of centralizing stormwater management and the next steps in establishing a Long Island Sound Watershed Regional Stormwater District. Please welcome Rich Franzetti.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Jim and I haven't practiced this, so my slides have a lot of animation to it, so I'm not going to go like this a lot, but I'll try. Unfortunately, I have a lot of things flying in from different areas. It's very dry when I'm giving. There's not a lot of photographs, so I try to at least keep the words, action. What's action? So, as Beth mentioned, well, you already trust it, we're going to talk about the role of a regional stormwater management district. The topics we're going to cover today start with the project background. We'll move on to the district development framework and finish up with the findings, recommendations, and the next steps that were identified in the report. As Beth mentioned, LISWIC is an association of 12 municipalities whose mission is to protect the Long Island Sound. And they commissioned this study to assess the feasibility of a regional stormwater management district in the area. This overhead map shows the lower Long Island Sound in red. This is the only time I'll use your pointer, Lenny. And the states that border it. As you can see, you have Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey. Well, New Jersey not really. New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And the actual drainage area for LISWIC, for the lower Long Island Sound and where we're located, is right down here, what we're talking about. But the drainage area for LISWIC goes all the way, and the map doesn't show it, but goes pretty much up through Canada. That will feed into Long Island Sound. As you can see, the health of the Long Island Sound will require the joint effort of many communities of across, a handful of states, and a stormwater district is a step in the right direction. This is a zoomed map of the communities that make up LISWIC. From the north, you have, the villages of Portchester and Rye Brook, cities of Harrison and Rye, villages of Mamaroneck and Larchmont, town of Mamaroneck, city of New Rochelle, Pelham Manor, city of Mount Vernon, and Scarsdale. The total area that encompasses the LISWIC communities is about 48,000 acres, or 75 square miles approximately. And the fact that some of these communities do not directly border, right? They don't directly border the Long Island Sound, suggests why a regional approach would be useful. If each community continues acting separately, then the downstream communities, as the downstream communities will attest to, will carry the majority of the burden of taking care of stormwater and worrying about the Long Island Sound. However, a collective approach by these various municipalities could have a better coordination of efforts. The goals, the collective vision of this district was to form a single organization that would allow member communities to correct regional flooding problems, comply with the Phase 2 NIPD's or Speedy stormwater regs that Lenny referred to earlier, and provide self-governance with regards to stormwater. Malcolm Kearney's role was to help develop the necessary framework to make this happen. Our first step was to collect data from the participating communities, stormwater operations, and summarize it on a regional basis. This way, we can use the data as a benchmark for comparing alternative district scenarios. As you can see, 3 of the 12 communities have line item budgets for stormwater services. Most have stormwater-related equipment, such as street sweepers and vector trucks. All use outside contractors for services such as catch basin cleaning or emergency services. In addition, we learned after we spoke with each of the member communities as part of the study that right now the operations and maintenance costs for stormwater are at about $3.5 million per year. They've dedicated capital improvement projects at $2.2 million per year. Staffing is approximately 27 labor and 9 management positions. There's about 19,000, almost 20,000 catch basins, and about 400 miles of stormwater piping. You can see with the labor to management, there is that labor to management ratio. There suggests an area where we could be more efficient with with stormwater management and costs associated with it. So once we knew where the communities currently stood on stormwater management, we were able to start looking at how they can change in the future. We did this through a district development framework which consisted of 4 parts. First, there needs to be a sound legislative foundation for the district. On top of that foundation, we would have to develop a district's organizational structure and plans for how it will carry out its mission. Finally, we needed to determine the potential financing options and requirements for supporting the district. The first step then was to clarify where the communities then wanted to be. This chart shows 4 options available for forming a district. In the lower left, essentially, where it says status quo, we have the do-nothing option, which is to retain the current structure and operations of how we handle business today. Going up the left side, where it's the home rule special funding, the communities would retain control over their local operations, but supplementing new revenue in the form of user fees made available to help fund these local operations. If you move along to this, the lower right-hand corner, it's the opposite scenario. It's here we have a regional stormwater authority managing stormwater services, but funding would come from the existing sources where they come from now, which is property taxes. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner, you have the regional stormwater authority that would be funded by a user fee. Given the overall goals, the choice was made to pursue the regional stormwater authority funded by user fees. You can hit it again because it'll highlight something else. So, okay. Once it was decided that the regional district with user fees was to be examined, we set out to look at how we can establish the legislative foundation for this to happen. We engaged the help of Lester Steinman of Pace University to examine the various legislative models available to establish a district. The first one that was looked at was an Intergovernmental Relations Council, or an IRC, and as such, this type of structure is limited to an advisory role only. The next item was an intermunicipal agreement. This option has the disadvantages of limited power to finance and the lack of permanence that a regional authority would have. Next, there were county and town districts. These entities typically do not allow user fees and provide for limited local representation. And finally, we examined the public authority model. This model would allow for the district to act independently and to raise revenues from a variety of sources. However, there's always a however, it would also require expanding state legislation to allow for such a district. Ultimately, the consensus was made by the communities participating in the study to pursue the public authority model as a method for forming the district. The public authority model, although allowing broad powers, would require significant political support to be accomplished. To help navigate these issues, Lester Steinman outlined the following legislative issues that would need to be considered. To ensure that all stakeholders support the district, we recommended that each member municipality develop a home rule message that voices support of the district. We also highlighted the need to clearly communicate what control the municipalities and county would have within such a district. As for operations, it was necessary to ensure that a user fee was seen as equitable and that the stakeholders would be fairly represented. And finally, we pointed out that there may be some constitutional obstacles preventing municipalities from wholly participating without referenda. Hit it again, please. All right. After establishing the legislative foundation for the district, we moved on to developing the district's organizational framework. The overall vision was to have the customers and stakeholders express their concerns and needs to the representative body through numerous committees and forums. The body would then form ad hoc committees and to address each issue and form a solution. The decisions would be passed on to the Stormwater Authority for execution. Besides the overall framework, we also discussed various options available for the district, such as governance. What would be the best way to represent each community? Would each community get one vote per member? Would they go on votes on proportional voting, or by shares, or by population? Next. Also, we discussed how measures would be approved. Is a simple majority sufficient in all instances? If so, is it a majority of shares, or is it a majority of members, or both? And finally, we looked into ownership and staffing issues that would need to be considered. Namely, will the district be the sole owner of the assets, or will some be jointly owned? What additional staffing is required? In particular, we pointed out the increase for the need of specialists, such as people in public relations, water resources, and regulatory monitoring. After establishing, Chip, sorry, go ahead. After establishing the organization of the district, we moved on to the detailed planning that would be required to support it. The planning framework we developed consisted of 6 plans, namely a watershed management, source control, public education, capital improvement, operations and maintenance, and a financing plan. The watershed management plan would provide overall goals for the district. The source control plan would outline the various challenges that would need to be addressed to accomplish the district goals. The public education, capital improvement, and O&M plans would be the tools that allow the district to accomplish those goals. And finally, the financing plan details how the district would be funded. Just digging a little deeper, the watershed management plan, it's based on the goals of the project and the evaluation of past concerns. We identified the following issues that would need to be part of the district's watershed management plan. They included minimally floodplain management, pollution prevention and correction, low impact development, and protection of habitat. We then talked about the source control plan. In order to develop a source control plan framework, we compared each community's best management practices and developed an outline of a regional source control plan. This includes what Lenny was talking about earlier, which was the MS4 programs. Each individual community right now is implementing and working through their MS4, meeting those 6 minimum measures. And that was looking at those measures at this point in time as part of the source control plan. We looked at a public outreach plan. One of the main areas where districts fail are in communications. The public must be adequately informed and included in the decision-making process. To help develop the district develop its public outreach plan, we provided the outline that highlighted the need to develop clear objectives, determine specific target audiences, run various committees and forums, and maintain a website. We then addressed the operations plan, and in this we looked at the pros and cons of regional planning versus local operations to help understand what could be expected when transitioning two regional operations. We discussed key elements in the regional plans, which are level of service, service delivery methods, and performance benchmarking. And finally, we discussed how consolidating operations under a regional organization would allow for cost savings due to the elimination of duplication of efforts, realizing a higher asset to utilization ratio. Next, we're just going to touch base on capital improvement and the financing options that were part of the district. Capital improvement plans are the clearest evidence that to a community that things are being done and problems are being addressed. As such, great care needs to be taken to ensure that resources of the district are properly targeted and its rationale is transparent. To develop a capital planning framework, we first examined again the pros and cons of local and regional capital improvement planning. We then developed a capital planning process that would be transparent and involve all the key stakeholders. And finally, we suggested several means of actually deciding which capital projects would be funded. We then looked at the financing plan, which contained the following three elements: a discussion of different fee structures and potential revenue streams, developing various operating scenarios and funding scenarios, and evaluating each scenario to determine how much would be raised in the first 5 years of operation. This is the slide that always gets everyone upset. Stormwater fees. We considered three methods of raising revenue for the creation of the district: raising property taxes, billing based on property size, and billing based on impervious areas. Of these three, billing based on impervious area was most equitable, as well as a method that has been successful in other stormwater districts. This method bills customers based on the total amount of impervious area on their property, which ensures that each customer's bill is proportional to their stormwater contribution. Typically, the cost is expressed in terms of ERUs, or equivalent residential units, which is a standard square footage of impervious area used to calculate the number of billing units contained on each property. In this case, for this study, we used 2,200 square feet as the minimum to do our assessment. This slide just quickly shows typical residential user fees that you'll find throughout the nation. San Antonio, Texas, about $3.93, working its way up to Fort Collins, Colorado at $20.94. That's on a monthly basis. So every month, homeowners are paying those prices. Taking all this information that I quickly have gone through, we knew that there was $3.5 million in O&M costs. We knew that there was a fee that was going to be used. We did a scenario analysis, and to help provide how revenue, O&M costs, and capital expenditures would interact, we developed scenarios for funding analysis. First, we established three levels of O&M cost: a low, medium, and high. The low is currently what the region is spending on O&M, $3.5 million. The medium represented a 50% increase off that number, and the high represented a 100% increase in O&M costs. We then, for each O&M scenario, we evaluated three capital improvement financing options: 100% cash, 50% debt, or 100% debt. Then finally, to establish a revenue for the district, we conservatively used a $5 per month per ERU as a user fee. When you looked at that last graph, that was at the lower end. $3.93 was in Texas, and $20, or almost $21, was in Colorado. Based on these scenarios, we found that the gross revenue would range between $7.2 to $8.1 million. The gross revenue would be, $7.2 to $8.1 million. The operating cash flow would be about $200K to about $3.7 million. And the 5-year capital funding would range between $3.3 and $40.5 million. That would be raised in the 5 years. The next one kind of graphs out what this does. It's the output of the analysis that I just kind of explained. It shows the available capital expenditures after 5 years, and this is the key one here, it shows, you can see capital funding available is sensitive to O&M costs, and moderately sensitive to debt policy. So that's essentially what this graph is showing. We can go into more detail on that if we need to later on. This next slide is just more of a graphic to show, the steps that are needed. Once the district development was completed and the framework was out there, we needed to start thinking about implementation. To do this, we developed this chart to visualize and outline the intermediate steps between where the communities are now, which is down here, the highlighted red. They are an interlocal stormwater planning board. Status quo is what the municipalities are. This is kind of what Liswick is on this graph. And municipal stormwater budget items. Some of them have line items, some of them included almost, as part of their regular public works. Each step outlined in this chart represents an increase in the consolidation of either funding on the vertical axis or operations on the horizontal axis. And in order to create a regional district, you would have to move through some or all of these. You don't have to go through all of them, but you would move through them to get to this point right here. So you pretty much, again, this is just that scenario planning. You start down here, and you want to end up here. And so it's kind of a visual to get you there. So we're back, that was essentially what we did as this study. And so the findings and recommendations, putting it all together, was that we would establish a regional stormwater district as a public authority. Financing would be from a user fee, a flat residential fee based on the 2,200 square feet, and impervious areas for non-residential units or non-residential areas. The focus would be on flooding and pollutant loads, and there would be regional operations and maintenance. To continue on, we allocated CIP monies by an allocation formula. There would be sole ownership of assets and joint ownership of infrastructure, similar to what goes on with the water boards here in the area. And there would be a region-wide stormwater management plan that would need to be developed. The next step for the regional stormwater district, now that the framework has been done and the concept has been completed, a list of items that are needed are: you need to reach consensus on key issues, develop a strategy for state legislature, which is currently going on, develop a region-wide GIS database, determine billing units. Going back to the GIS database, that's what Beth mentioned earlier, and the county has some of that information. Also, next step would be define levels of service. What would this district be, providing? Assess your capital and O&M needs. That's based on each municipality's goals right now. Review and consolidate the best management practices, the existing BMPs, and determine a staffing method. So just so you know, copies of this report, which I have one, but this is my personal copy, can be found at two locations. The executive summary can be found at liswick.org, and the complete report can be found at scarsdale.com. Just do a search on it. It would be a PDF form of it, so just be ready to download some large documents. And if there are any questions, immediate questions will come at the end of this, but there are also questions if you need to. Phyllis, I hope you don't mind, but Phyllis Whitner, who's the chair of Liswick, she's probably going to be very angry at me for bringing her up. She's right here in the front, just so you know. And Dan Sarnoff of the Village of Scarsdale, and myself, if you ever want to touch base. So, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm just acknowledging that we're improving the watershed right now after that presentation.
Well, I enjoyed talking to you so much the first time. I decided I'd come up again. On this presentation, I want to acknowledge and thank Dana Gum. He's the director of the Blue Belt Project in the New York City DEP, who gave me a lot of the materials that you're going to see here. And I assure you that I'm going to have the most beautiful slides of the night in this presentation. we're talking about constructed wetlands. So before I go into that, let's talk about wetlands in general. What are wetlands? Wetlands are the link between, thank you, land and water, where the flow of water, the cycling of nutrients, and the energy of the sun meet to produce highly productive ecosystems. In the past, wetlands were viewed as a nuisance to developers, to be filled in so there may be more usable land. I know when I was a boy growing up, there was a wetlands where there is now Co-op City. They actually first, they had something called Freedom Land down there. Those were all wetlands that should have been protected, but unfortunately they were filled in. A classic example of the old way of thinking was the way that Robert Moses of Roads Not Rails fame, the way that he thought about developing the area to make it car-friendly. The Belt Parkway, the FDR Drive, all of those were filled in wetlands. There was enormous amounts of ecosystems that were destroyed in the process. Next. So why are they really significant? And wetlands have been greatly misunderstood in the previous century. There's a number of reasons why we have the protections that there shall be no more net wetland loss in this country right now. Wetlands provide a rich habitat for wildlife. They attract migrating birds. Every spring, wetlands are teeming with life. They are a key to ecological balance. So, in terms of protecting nature, wetlands protection is vital. But in addition, they do things that greatly benefit us humans. They purify water. One scientist came up with a great quote. He called wetlands nature's kidneys. If you measure the water quality coming into a natural wetland and you see what comes out of that wetland, you will find a net improvement in water quality every time. Another very significant factor, and this is in the last decade, has become more and more of an issue and more in the awareness of citizens, is that wetlands are the best way to control flooding. The reason is that wetlands break velocity of water. All of a sudden, you have a quiet phase. They have great detention and storage capacity. So in terms of water quality and in terms of preventing flooding, they're key. So engineers had the idea of wetlands really are valuable. You study them in nature, you find their value. They thought, what if we could replicate these and use these for things like pollution control and managing stormwater? They came up with the concept of constructed wetlands, which are excavated basins with irregular perimeters and undulating bottom contours into which wetland vegetation is purposely placed to enhance pollutant removal from stormwater runoff. Stormwater enters a constructed wetland through a forebay, where the larger solids and coarse organic matter settle out. The stormwater discharged from the forebay passes through emergent vegetation, which acts to filter organic materials and soluble nutrients. The vegetation can also remove some dissolved nutrients. So, wetlands replicate nature, provide pollution control, and mitigate flooding. Before I was the regional water engineer in this region, in the Hudson River Valley, that included Westchester, I worked in the Region 2 office for the New York State DEC that covers the 5 boroughs of New York City. When I was there, I discovered the Blue Belt. The Blue Belt refers to this geographical location in southern Staten Island. And Staten Island is unlike the other boroughs of New York City because there were still some areas of undeveloped land. And there was an enormous growth spurt. The developers were building left and right. And when they were building communities down there, they did it old school. They did it with paving, they did it with traditional stormwater management, and there were several problems that occurred. Next slide, please. One of the things that happened is Staten Island experienced awful episodes of flooding. Now, if you think about why we have so much flooding in the last decade, there's several factors. Certainly one of them is our habit for paving everything. When you have less porous surfaces, less permeable surfaces, the water is going to accumulate and run off in greater and greater quantities. And there is great possibilities that our climate is changing. There's something called the 100-year storm, and we've had several of those in the last decade that were 100 or more. The severity of storms seem to be becoming more and more as climate control becomes more and more in the consciousness of our communities. Next. Well, I wanted to bring it to your attention, and anybody who will listen, I'll be glad to tell them about this because I'm a believer that this is an answer. It's not the answer to all the problems of all communities, but it's an answer that's largely not being looked at enough, that can help communities that have problems with stormwater water quality and with flooding issues. This is a diagram of an extended detention basin. The key here is the word detention. These water bodies are designed typically on an acre or more, where you see here's a community. This is a developed community where this was built. And they had some land, instead of building more houses on that land, they set it aside to manage the stormwater in this constructed wetland, known as an extended detention basin. You notice that water enters the forebay. I spoke about that before. The forebay is a velocity break. It's a deep pool. It's a place where the water slows greatly. Then, replicating nature, streams meander. You notice that you have this sinusoidal design. That's to create a much greater detention time. You can have detention time from 1 day or 2 days or more, depending on the size and the design of the system. You have deep bottoms, you have irregular bottoms, and then you have plantings. At the other end, you have something called a micropool, where you have filtering as well to capture some more of the pollutants before it emerges. Next. This is an actual picture of what that looks like. Over here, this is just 1 year after the plantings. Now, these are done with the help of landscape architects. These are done with the help of botanists. You tend to, you might wonder what kind of plants. Obviously, you want to use plants that do well in very wet conditions. The native plants are the best. And the reason for that is native plants are best designed, are best acclimated to living in the area where you're building it. Next. And here you can see the way that you have the long detention time because of the way it's laid out in a sinusoidal design. If you don't have that much land, then you can still do something. To mitigate pollution from runoff. Over here you have a creek called Richmond Creek. And what you see is, this is called a pocket wetland. It's a smaller one. It's similar to the extended detention basin. But over here, you have an emergency spillway. You have an outlet into the creek. But what you're doing is you're taking flow, excessive flow off the creek, and carrying it through this area where you can slow the velocities and mitigate flooding. And this is what that looks like once it's developed. And you can see, unlike most things that us engineers do, where you might have something that looks like poured concrete, you have something that is beautiful for the community, that not only serves an engineering function, but has aesthetic value. Next. A third thing that can be done is you can retrofit an existing pond. You may have a pond. Typically, ponds in our developed areas are not healthy. They suffer through eutrophication. They become oxygen starved. The plant growth takes over. They tend to be filled up with a lot of sediment. But you can restore these ponds and do something even better. Next. This is, you can see the actual construction, and you can get an idea of the depth that these things are designed to. Over here, I wanted you to see this slide where you see, this is where the water will emerge and enter the pond. And over here, go ahead, next. Here it is after it's built. And you see the water coming down like a cascade or a waterfall. That's intentional. The reason is that flooding water has energy. You dissipate the energy by having things like cascades and waterfalls. That's part of the design. Not to mention adding oxygen to the water. And this is what it looks like when it's all completed. Next. At the outlet of these basins and ponds, you have stilling basins. You have, and this is what nature does. In nature, the way that water, you slow the velocity of the water is by having a deep pool. In nature, that's where trout fishermen know to look for their trout. So how does this work? This is not really a very complicated concept. You have extended detention that slows downstream velocities. One of the things engineers do is they have to examine for that partial watershed. You have to study the hydrology. You have to analyze, if you have a storm, when is it going to reach a peak flow? And then you have to stagger peak flows so that you don't have all the peaks happening at the same time. So you don't have this one big wave coming down on a community. You can design and look at the hydrology to the benefit of the community and to mitigate flooding. And significantly enough, where there was constant complaints of flooding, when there was the nor'easter that caused trouble in so many communities, including up here in Westchester, there were no reports of flooding anywhere in the Blue Belt region. Next. There was water quality sampling done to see before and after, and what they discovered was 56% of suspended solids were removed from before the wetland and after the wetland. 26% of the total nitrogen was removed. And that certainly is significant when you have nitrogen causing problems in water bodies, in marine water bodies. And 70% of the bacteria was removed. And the nitrogen and bacteria largely are tied with the sediment. When you take the sediment out, that helps remove the nutrients and it helps remove the bacteria. It's an ecologically sound way to solve a problem. One of the things that is really neat that you can do is you can plant extirpated species. Extirpated means extinct in a local geographic location. So what they did in Staten Island is they studied the past. What plants, what wildflowers, what wild plants existed 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that now don't grow naturally anywhere on the island. Well, they restored them, and now they're growing again. And you have an aesthetic improvement of the community. Now, what is very significant, this was done by DEP in New York City, in Staten Island. And of course, the big difference between New York City and Westchester County is that there's one municipality. Now, talking to the DEP folks, they said, yeah, we had our issues because we had to deal with the Parks Department and we had to deal with some of it was DEP land, some of it belonged to historic preservation, and none of them get along. He said, yeah, but you're one city. The mayor says do it, you do it. Well, not quite that simple, but they were able to get people to be reasonable and work together. Here, it requires an effort. You can't do this sort of thing piecemeal. You can't do it in Mamaroneck and not do it in White Plains. You have to have a cohesive effort. And there are many benefits to that. Just going back to what I spoke about a little while ago when I told you about the MS4 general permits. Well, I can tell you, being from DEC, they're very serious. They're going to come down and look for compliance. And if communities that are not in compliance are going to face enforcement, it certainly would benefit an area, a watershed, to take a watershed approach and have one MS4 over a larger area. And I know DEC is willing to entertain this concept, rather than having 7 or 8 or 9 separate local communities all trying to run their own program. That's just one of the benefits. Finally, planning has to be done on a regional basis. Certainly, when you look at water issues, it has to be done on a watershed basis to have a rational approach and to have something that's economically viable. So it really is imperative, I think, for local communities to learn to work together for the mutual benefit.
Bear with us a few more minutes because I think that it's going to be worth your time. I think we started a little late and we'll be done in about 10 minutes. That was excellent, and I can visualize a lot of this in certain parts of down Mamaroneck Avenue, and just think it's really quite extraordinary what they did in Staten Island, and hopefully we'll be able to do something along those lines here. So we just see an example of best management practices at the government level and how that benefits people in the community. This kind of infrastructure can also be used in your own backyard. Obviously not something this elaborate, but something to protect and enhance the value of your home. Individual best management practices, if you will. The Natural Resources Defense Council, in its 2006 report entitled Rooftops to Rivers, provides impressive case studies of 9 American and Canadian cities that have expanded their wastewater infrastructure capacity underground and strategically located green infrastructure above ground to improve water quality and reduce flooding. Private property owners got into the act, and according to the NRDC report, these green approaches are often less expensive and more effective than current stormwater and combined sewer overflow controls. Based on its own findings, the report recommended revising state and local stormwater regulations to encourage green design. To expedite improvement and to share in restoration process in our region, we should consider likewise creating incentives for all residential and commercial property owners who incorporate green infrastructure. Begin by calling your property insurer to learn what retrofits you can construct or install under existing guidelines to save insurance premiums under your policy. And to the extent restoration practices are not reflected in reduced insurance rates, our federal and state representatives might legislate new ways to create homeowner incentives for restoration efforts, which aim to prevent on-site and downstream property damage from weather events. FEMA's Homeowner Guide to Flood Prevention provides one avenue to explore, or a federal approach could provide tax incentives on home retrofits or restored permeable surfaces as it does for purchasing a hybrid car. As mentioned earlier, aging infrastructure and loss of permeable surface top the list of factors contributing to flooding. It follows that identifying ways to reverse the factors should involve us all. As for the projects themselves, the City of Chicago provided $5,000 grants to install small-scale roof gardens. And in a cooperative cost-sharing arrangement, Milwaukee Sewer District partnered with private business to install more than 60 rain gardens to receive and treat roof runoff at a combined cost of $170,000. Milwaukee also instituted a downspout disconnection program, redirecting building downspouts from combined sewers to rain barrels, with the rain barrel overflow going to permeable surfaces and rain gardens. As of 2006, Portland, Oregon's downspout disconnection program diverted 1 billion gallons of stormwater away from its sewer system. In Pittsburgh, which is developed around the confluence of 3 rivers, a few community groups commissioned an engineering study to determine where rain barrels would be most effective. And this culminated in installing 500 large rain barrels, 132 gallons each, in critical neighborhoods. And again in Portland, Oregon, the installation of vegetative curb extensions reduced peak flow for a 25-year storm by 88%, which was enough to eliminate basement flooding. It's this last case study that caught my attention as something to consider as a current restoration effort along the side of the Mamaroneck River, presumably without interfering with the future work by the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, architectural ingenuity coming from the Netherlands and England, where rising sea levels and flooding is more commonplace, also provides options for us to consider here for the future. Approaches include standalone floating architecture, as well as designs with integrated green space buttressed by barriers. Wetland mitigation banking, a concept similar to trading carbon credits, is a practice of restoring, creating, or enhancing areas of wetlands in one location to provide compensatory mitigation for authorized adverse impacts to wetlands in another nearby location. Enabling legislation for wetland mitigation banking was introduced into our state legislature several years ago by Senator Carl Liebel and Assemblyman Robin Schimminger. The bill is currently under consideration at DEC, the entity with regulatory authority over our wetlands. Already in effective use in 35 other states, public interest can help facilitate legislative action to bring wetland mitigation banking to New York and provide another tool for addressing our water challenges. That part concludes tonight's presentation, but as I mentioned earlier, this is a community event and one that is setting the stage for more community events in April. The green infrastructure practices mentioned this evening will be part of the hands-on learning during Green Week from April 12th to April 18th. Green Week is a tri-municipal event including the Village of Larchmont and the Town and Village of Mamaroneck, providing free opportunities to learn practices with family, friends, and neighbors that will enhance the value of your home and benefit our environment. Organizers include Sheldrake's Environmental Center's Marie Venecia, Mary Davis, Jan Feynman, Catherine Wachs, and Sarah Evans, among others, who've worked with me to plan these community events. Courses include organic gardening, tree planting, tree pruning, installing a rain garden, and recycling. A free showing of the documentary film Addicted to Oil, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters and Mamaroneck High School, will take place at the high school on Monday, April 14th at 7 p.m. with speaker Edna Sussman discussing the recommendations of the Westchester County Global Warming Task Force. Our elementary school students will participate in writing nature, prose, and poetry. And local merchants are participating as well in a variety of fun ways. Check tonight's handout, the Sheldrake website, or Larchmont Loop calendar for details about these and other events, and kindly RSVP to Jan Feynman so she will have an idea of how many people to expect. Also included information for those wishing to donate toward replanting trees locally, which is a very effective way to reduce flooding. However you choose to participate in Green Week, it is intended to further foster the importance of community and communication expressed here tonight. And on behalf of all involved with Green Week, we hope you and your family will find a number of things to enjoy. Now, at last year's forum on the importance of trees, people brought home a Norway spruce sapling to plant. This year, This year, in keeping with a theme of a cooperative approach to water quality and flood control, I selected an item which, if broken down into its individual compartments or cells, does little to filter or absorb water, but when assembled together into a collection of cells, works very effectively to filter and absorb water. Any guesses? No? There you go. It's a pop-up sponge. This is compliments of Trader Joe's. When you use your sponge, consider tonight's message that where water issues are concerned, the whole, in this case, a regional cooperative approach, is more effective than the sum of our municipal parts. Please take home the program directory prepared for tonight's forum with your Green Week calendar and sponge. And for those who weren't able to make it tonight, tonight's forum can be re-aired on LMC-TV by your call-in request, and also will air on Westchester County's cable station 504. One final note, please join the League of Women Voters at its Larchmont-Mamaroneck, the Larchmont-Mamaroneck League's May 2nd annual luncheon, which is going to be at the Davenport Club, with Channel 12's spirited point-counterpoint political commentators, Republican Michael Edelman and Democrat Lawrence Otis Graham, tackling the question, the press and the election, who is manipulating whom. So you please pick up an invitation in the lobby. If there are questions, please pass them over. And I would also like to invite Jim Scholl, if you wouldn't mind coming up for a moment. Jim is actually overseeing the creation of regional stormwater management districts, and I think if there are any questions along those lines, he can field them. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Lisa Hockman asks, would a regional stormwater district have the authority to review local land use decisions to ensure that they are consistent with regional watershed plans and policies? And if yes, would this add an intolerable expense and delay to development? If no, wouldn't that diminish the effectiveness of the stormwater utility district? Because land use practices have a direct impact on non-point source pollution and stormwater management. Someone want to take that?
We just need to hear the part of it again.
Would a regional stormwater utility district have the authority to review land use decisions to ensure that they are consistent with regional watershed plans and policies?
The decision to centralize the land use policies would be up to the communities. The Home Rule Authority would maintain the base authority for those land use decisions. So it'd be a cooperative effort to the extent that the communities would like to share that authority with a regional district. Ultimately, it's, I think, also something would need to be considered as a part of the legislative process in terms of clearly identifying whether that is a part of what the regional authority would like to have covered, because the home rule responsibilities, at least from your perspective, probably what would be the legal issues to cover that. But certainly it would be a policy decision that the community would need to discuss, and the regional authority would have to decide who would be best suited. The major element, though, would still be the development standards that provide a consistency when construction projects are performed, so that the criteria between jurisdictions, even in the midst of independent land use decisions, would have a common outcome in terms of design standards. So design standards would be, I think, the first step in providing coordination in land use decisions.
I just noted that Seattle has some proposed stormwater regulations that are very forward-thinking. They're requiring all development, future development, to have green design. So, you know, it may be that even while we maintain the integrity of home rule, that we adopt a different sensibility about how we're going to move forward. And likewise, as I mentioned, if we retrofit, if people take on the responsibility of actually digging up the asphalt in their driveway and putting in permeable surface, and we all acknowledge that that costs more money, but there may be, you know, maybe you can get a tax credit, maybe there may be other incentives for doing so. We self-regulate, if you will, and we level our own playing field. So, you know, there's that possibility as well. But I think, you know, as is being indicated, it's really going to be a matter for discussion among the municipalities here. The question here, the comment is that our town officials seem to be knowledgeable about stormwater. I would like to know if anyone here is from our local planning board or highway department. These departments still function as they have previously. How can this information transform how we build to capture, not discard, stormwater? Does someone want to elaborate on the question? Yes, please.
Well, that's my question, and I see a lot of, well, some people have left already, but what I see happening is we spend all this money, let's say, on the Brook to plant wetlands, constructed wetlands. We spend a lot of money still thinking about a grant, and the highway department regularly comes by to clip down all the vegetation right up to the water. So all of the good efforts are gone. I've gone to a couple of planning board meetings where I've asked developers to put in like some stormwater, you know, instead of putting up the islands and the high curves, you know, put them down so we can capture stormwater, and they say, oh yes, yes, yes. And then I see like the 20 that was built on the West Coast Road. It's built like every other development has been built since the 1950s. So, you know, it's great that all these people are here tonight, but is there anybody here from the highway department? Is there anybody here from the planning board? No. You're always there. That would be something.
And that way they would know what's planted and what to maintain. We thought that would be a good idea as a local master grant.
That's a very good suggestion. I hope that going forward, the officials that are here tonight will start to communicate what they know to the planning board and their.
Well, Catherine, the other thing we can do is we can put this on LMC-TV and let people know that this conversation is happening tonight and invite them to watch it. You know, it's one step that we can take. Thank you. Robert Funicello wants us to know that the residents here can find the Westchester Climate Action Plan at westchestergov.com/global warming. It's useful in thinking about how water resource issues are part of the climate change issue. I mean, absolutely. You know, when we put down permeable surfaces, we heat everything up. And when water runs down asphalt, it's a lot warmer when it gets into the Long Island Sound than if it gets filtered through grass. So that's why everybody can make a difference. I hope if people will go home with a message tonight, it is that every single one of us can do a little thing or a medium-sized thing, and it really does make a difference. Nitrogen and phosphorus were highlighted as lawn pollutants runoff. There isn't a movement to publicize that most lawn insecticides kill frogs in runoff. Thank you. I did not know that. Richard, what are the savings of a regional authority versus individual municipality? Have you looked at rough percentages in other communities?
But the study did not address that particularly down to that number, but Jim can add to that with his experience in developing others to see that. But there definitely will be cost savings by looking at, you know, having as Lenny mentioned at the end, having one MS4 versus having 12 MS4s or 15 MS4s, because right now then you have 15 municipalities doing 15 of the same things, public workshops or websites, or, you know, I&I detection when some of those pipes are going over watershed boundaries. So there would be cost savings just inherently with that, and Jim can add some more to that.
Well, another important way to look at that is the monies that are being spent today on stormwater, although they are significant, in the bigger scheme of things, it really isn't adequate. So the goal here is to take the monies that are being spent and make them go longer or get a bigger result. So that by creating the regional program, the potential to reduce the overlap allows the same amount of money to go farther. And the end result is, when we looked at the study, it's, as you could see the numbers that were presented, the money that's being spent today needs to increase to be able to deal with the stormwater quality issues, the flooding issues. So the real goal here, although it will provide savings, there's additional funding needed. And so my experience is that although you will see reduction in terms of the cost per, activity that's performed, that the need for spending is going to need to go up, so that the end result is the stormwater district will generate a better funded, a sustainable source of revenue.
The other point that I alluded to earlier is that there can be more uniform enforcement of regulations if you've got one body looking at it, and in order of priority, there are certain laws that are probably more effective than others. You know, we've identified nitrogen, so if there are laws that are in effect that can help mitigate that, we can really try to zero in on those. Is there a written description of New York's DEC Blue Belt work? Is Blue Belt on the, oh, I provided in my directory, I can answer that question. I provided in my directory some nifty information, and Lenny had given me a fantastic article on Blue Belt, and you can read it, and I have the information in here. I think I have 2 references to Blue Belt. And if you can't find enough, you can email me and I'll get more for you.
If you Google it, you definitely will find information on the web.
It's one word though, because I looked for
Yes,
Blue Belt and I
right.
found all these great, you know, designs to wear, but nothing to clean up the environment. Let's see. Any hopes of increasing the frequency of quality testing for bacteria and TCES, I'm not sure what that is, in the Mamaroneck River? Last year I was told that it was too expensive and no one swims in it or drinks it. What is TCES? Do you know?
No.
TCEs.
Oh, TCEs. Okay.
Dry cleaner.
Oh, the dry cleaner.
Trichloroethylene.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, the answer is that we are, that it's part of our plan to make sure the Mamaroneck Sheldrake watershed is properly tested. We have sanitarians that go out and collect samples. Right now we're focusing on the Bronx River and the Hutchinson River. The Mamaroneck River is going to be, when we go to our next cycle, we will include that for water quality testing. As far as going for volatile organics, when we test the streams, that's not something that we typically find a problem with in ambient water quality sampling in streams. Is mostly it's bacteria. Bacteria is the single biggest indicator of a problem, and by far the most overreaching problem. So that's the focus, but we do other parameters as well, like nutrients, for instance, and metals.
Our last question of the evening is, what communities so far have asked to join? This says Liswick, but I think this is the stormwater. And I'd like if you would, after answering that question, if you would just address what is the next, sort of the next step, and also a little bit about the process so that we can look on a horizon to see how we're going to move through, and some of the, one success story about how people actually got to the district and how it's functioning, but specifically first to this and then to that. Yeah.
Well, all the communities that are part of Liswick were part of the study and were included in the study, and they've all been asked to look at legislation or to vote on legislation, and I know that a handful of them, I believe were at Lisbon, 7. So 7 of the 12 communities.
They've approved resolutions supporting the district.
They've approved resolutions supporting the district to move forward with that legislation, right, Liz? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
So that's where they're at right now. It's you know, it's at that level. It's at the political level right now. As for next steps, while we did go through some on the board, I mean, again, Jim could touch base on that, but one of them is getting all the communities to buy into this resolution and defining what that legislation to create this district would be. And that's where it gets through, that's where the nitty and gritty is. That's where it's real tough.
The question asker really wanted to know who's missing though, not who the members are, who's missing that we would like some members.
We're not going to get them in trouble at this moment, so you would have to ask the chair of Liswick or the folks from Liswick. And actually, I don't know that answer, so to be honest, I do not know that answer.
Should I bust them?
No, I wouldn't. No, I don't know that answer, and that was something that's happening right now beyond the scope of what the study that we presented, or I presented this evening, covered. That was the next step that's actually being implemented.
I guess 2 areas. One is in terms of the next steps. Although the legislation legally is the framework to legally establish the district and regional approach, with Liswick in place right now, there's a lot that can be done, and that forum has accomplished quite a bit. So I wouldn't view the need to adopt legislation as a hindrance to work together and continue to make progress, so that the message that needs to go forward right now, in addition to legislation, is the need for additional funding. And the success of any of these stormwater programs is directly related to the ability to generate funding. And one example in terms of a success story that is still in more of a formative stage than fully successful, but I've been doing some work in the last couple of years in El Paso, Texas. And you go back almost 15 years ago in El Paso, they were wrestling with a very similar issue and trying to figure out how to take the next step with stormwater programs. They looked at setting up a stormwater utility, but for whatever reason, the politics didn't line up, and it got tabled. And it wasn't so much that it failed as they're in a drought area. It doesn't rain a lot, and so it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. They ignored it, and that was fine until the summer of 2006, and they had between a 100 and a 500-year flood that created major devastation and disruption to the community. The infrastructure damage was well over $100 million. The property damage was several hundred million more than that. And it got people's attention. They realized they were ignoring things. And when we first started the evaluation to help them go from an independent approach to a regional approach, was recognizing that they'd done the planning, they'd identified the needs, but they hadn't funded it. And the whole success of that program depended on generating a reliable and dependable source of funding, because it was always convenient to spend it on other things because it was out of sight, out of mind. So in essence, they're now, just this year, starting the collection. They've committed to raise the fees, and they're going to generate several $1 million to start investing in the infrastructure, along with increasing the level of spending on operation and maintenance by about twice. So they determined that their funding on operation and maintenance wasn't adequate, and they were able to double it with their first step in the establishment of fee structure, and right now they're just starting to collect that money. So that's one example.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all for coming. This will continue this dialogue, will continue, and I think as indicated by this, we as a community have to stay involved in a conversation. It would be so unfortunate for us to wait for more floods to have to get together to fix it. You know, we've already got enough impetus, and it seems as if we're walking in the right direction. Thanks to Liswick for starting this process. Thank you to our speakers for your inspiration, to the Emlyn Theater and LMC-TV. Thank you to all of you for coming. Please take your sponge home and join us for Green Week, and have a great year. Good night.